They tied a rope around the ranch dog's neck at sunrise and called it justice. And if you had driven past the Walker Ranch that morning, you would have thought it was just another small-town decision made in the name of survival. The sky over western Montana was pale and cold, the kind of early light that makes everything look honest. And maybe that was the problem, because nothing about what happened the night before was honest. 18 sheep lay torn across the lower pasture, their white wool stained dark against the frost-bitten grass. The fence line had been breached. Blood trailed toward the dirt road, and sitting 20 yards from the carnage, silent and still, was Ranger. The Walker family's 5-year-old sheepdog, his thick tan and black coat matted red, his chest rising slowly, his amber eyes fixed not on the dead animals, but on the highway beyond the fields. By the time the sun broke fully over the hills, half the town had gathered. Ranchers came in denim and worn leather gloves, boots crunching gravel, faces tight with anger that had been building for months. Beef prices were falling. Feed costs were rising. The bank in town had already sent warning letters to 3 families. People weren't just looking at dead sheep. They were looking at another hit they couldn't afford. And when money tightens, patience disappears. Someone had to be responsible. Someone had to pay. Sheriff Donnelly stood near his cruiser with his thumbs hooked into his belt, studying Ranger from a distance. He wasn't a cruel man, but he was practical. "If a dog turns," he said flatly, loud enough for the crowd to hear, "it doesn't turn back." The words hung heavy in the cold air. A few men nodded. One woman wiped tears from her face, not for the dog, but for the sheep her family had lost. The story was already forming in everyone's mind. Ranger must have tasted blood. Maybe he'd run with coyotes. Maybe instinct had taken over. It was simpler that way, cleaner. They tied him to a thick cedar post near the equipment shed. The rope was heavy ranch cord, looped twice. Ranger didn't resist. He didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth. That, somehow, made some of them angrier. A guilty animal should act guilty. But Ranger just sat, watching the road. Ethan Walker arrived last. 16 years old, tall but still carrying the awkward edges of growing into himself, he had been the one to find Ranger as a pup abandoned near a drainage ditch during a thunderstorm 8 years earlier. He'd wrapped the shivering bundle in his own jacket and begged his father to keep him. Since then, Ranger had slept at the foot of Ethan's bed through winter storms, had followed him across frozen creeks, had once chased off a pack of coyotes during lambing season without hesitation. Ethan had seen that dog face danger. He had never seen him confused. And this morning, Ranger didn't look wild. He looked alert. Ethan pushed through the crowd, his jaw clenched. "He didn't do this," he said, louder than he intended. Several heads turned. His father, Mark Walker, gave him a look that carried both warning and exhaustion. "Son," he said quietly, "we found him in the blood." The sentence sounded final, like a verdict. But Ethan had been in the lower pasture before dawn. He had seen things others ignored. The fencing hadn't been chewed or crushed like it would be from predators forcing entry. The wire had been cut, clean, straight, deliberate. He'd found a section where the metal edges shone silver against the rust, fresh and sharp. Near the gate were tire impressions deeper than a pickup would leave, wide enough for a livestock trailer. And one sheep was missing entirely. Not dragged, not mauled. Gone. Wolves don't load sheep into trailers. Ranger's paws were torn at the pads, raw in places, like he had run hard on gravel. There was a bite wound on his flank that didn't match sheep teeth or coyote jaws. And when Ethan knelt beside him now, slipping his fingers gently through the thick fur at his neck, he noticed something else. Ranger's teeth were clean, no wool caught between them, no flesh, no sign of feeding, just the metallic scent of blood he had clearly moved through. "Executions at noon," someone muttered behind him. Noon, as if they were setting a town event, as if it were something to circle on a calendar. The crowd slowly dispersed to make calls, to spread the word, to confirm what they already believed. The rope remained. Ranger remained, and he kept staring toward the highway. Every time a vehicle passed in the distance, his ears twitched forward. His body tensed slightly, then relaxed again, waiting. By mid-morning, gossip had hardened into certainty. At the diner, coffee mugs clinked against saucers while theories grew sharper. "Dogs go bad," someone said. "It happens. Better to put him down now than wait for him to turn on a kid. Fear doesn't need evidence. It just needs repetition." Ethan sat alone on the tailgate of the ranch truck, replaying the details in his mind. Around midnight, he had woken briefly to the distant hum of an engine. He'd thought nothing of it at the time. Ranch roads weren't busy at that hour, but now the memory pressed harder. There had been headlights sweeping across the barn wall, and Ranger had barked, not wildly, but in sharp, urgent bursts. Then silence. He stood and walked back to the pasture edge. The wind had picked up, carrying the dry scent of dust and hay. Ranger's eyes met his. There was no fear in them, no confusion, just focus. Ethan turned and followed the direction of that stare. The highway curved a quarter-mile beyond the tree line. From there, you could access 3 different ranch roads before reaching town. Anyone could have slipped in and out unnoticed. Then he saw it. At the far bend, barely visible through the shimmer of heat rising off the asphalt, a livestock trailer rolled past slowly. White, mud-splattered, the rear plate partially obscured by dirt. It didn't belong to anyone in their immediate circle. Ethan would have recognized it. The trailer didn't slow, it didn't stop, but Ranger rose to his feet the instant it appeared, muscles tight, a low growl vibrating through his chest. Not rage, recognition. Ethan's pulse quickened. That wasn't the reaction of a predator who had tasted blood. That was the reaction of a guardian who had seen the threat before. Behind him, a hammer struck wood as someone reinforced the post. Noon was approaching. The town was preparing to end the story, but Ethan's mind had just begun to open it. He stepped closer to Ranger and whispered under his breath, "You weren't hunting, were you?" Ranger didn't look at him. He kept watching the road. By the time the church bell struck 11, the entire town had convinced itself that what was about to happen was necessary. Pickup trucks lined the gravel road outside the Walker Ranch. Men stood with arms folded. Women whispered behind tight hands. A decision had been made, and small towns don't like undoing decisions once pride is involved. Ranger was still tied to the cedar post, the rope cutting slightly into his thick fur, his breathing steady, his gaze never drifting far from the highway. Ethan hadn't slept. After seeing that livestock trailer roll past again, something inside him had shifted from grief to certainty. He didn't need belief anymore. He needed proof. So at first light, before the crowd fully gathered, he'd taken his father's old ATV and followed the faint tire impressions leading from the cut fence toward the access road. They weren't obvious unless you were looking, but Ethan was looking. The tracks veered off toward Miller's grain warehouse, a place that hadn't been properly used in years except for seasonal storage. It sat half a mile outside town limits, quiet and forgotten. As he approached the warehouse, he killed the engine and coasted the rest of the way. The massive sliding doors were cracked open just enough to allow ventilation. Inside, he heard movement, metal clanking, low voices, and sheep. His chest tightened. Ethan slipped through a side entrance and stopped cold. Dozens of sheep stood packed behind temporary fencing inside the warehouse, some marked with brands from neighboring ranches. Not just his family's. This hadn't started last night. It had been going on for weeks, maybe months. Stolen livestock, staged attacks, insurance claims waiting to be filed. And near the loading ramp stood 3 men. One was the livestock buyer from 2 counties over, a man who always paid in cash. The second was a hired hand Ethan vaguely recognized. And the third, Deputy Sheriff Collins, the same deputy who had stood loudest that morning, insisting Ranger had turned. Ethan's stomach dropped. Collins wasn't just present, he was directing. "Move those marked ones first," he said. "Insurance won't cover duplicates." He laughed under his breath like this was just another transaction. Suddenly, the pieces locked together. The fence had been cut cleanly, the trailer seen at midnight, Ranger barking in warning, the blood on his fur from fighting off intruders, not killing sheep. He must have attacked the thieves, tried to block the trailer. Failed. And when the men fled, they left him standing in the wreckage they created. Framed. A noise echoed behind Ethan. A sheep kicked the metal gate. Collins turned slightly. Ethan didn't wait. He snapped photos as fast as he could. Brands visible, license plate partially clear, Collins's face unmistakable, and slipped back out. Heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. By the time he roared back toward the ranch, the crowd had thickened. Noon approached. Ranger stood now, rope taut, ears alert. Sheriff Donnelly held a rifle across his chest, not aiming yet, but ready. The weight of inevitability hung in the air. Mark Walker stepped forward, jaw tight. "Let's make this quick," he muttered. It wasn't cruelty, it was resignation. "Wait!" Ethan's voice tore across the pasture before the engine even stopped. Heads turned. Gravel sprayed as he jumped from the ATV, phone clutched in his hand. He didn't slow down. He walked straight into the circle, straight toward the sheriff. "You're about to kill the wrong one." Donnelly's brow furrowed. "Ethan, this isn't the time." "It is exactly the time." He held up his phone. Photos, clear enough. Branded sheep behind warehouse fencing. The livestock trailer parked inside, and Deputy Collins standing beside it. A ripple moved through the crowd like wind across wheat. "That's Miller's warehouse," someone whispered. Donnelly stared at the screen. His jaw shifted. "Where did you get this?" "Right now," Ethan said. "They're loading sheep. Ours, theirs, all of them." As if summoned by truth itself, an engine roared in the distance. The same white livestock trailer appeared on the highway, accelerating fast, too fast. It wasn't passing through casually this time. It was leaving. Ranger reacted instantly. The moment the trailer came into view, he lunged forward with a force that snapped the cedar post loose from the softened earth. The rope still hung from his collar, dragging behind him as he sprinted across the pasture. Not wild, not frantic, focused. The crowd froze. Ranger cut across the lower field and intercepted the dirt access road as the trailer swerved sharply, trying to avoid him. The truck fishtailed slightly on loose gravel. Ranger didn't attack randomly. He ran straight toward the driver's side, barking sharply, controlled, commanding, the bark of a working dog confronting a threat. Sheriff Donnelly jumped into his cruiser and tore after the truck. 2 other ranchers followed in pickups. Dust swallowed the road. Within minutes, sirens echoed faintly. The crowd that had gathered for an execution now stood in silence, confusion turning into something heavier. Realization. 20 minutes later, the sirens returned. The livestock trailer rolled back into view. Slower this time, boxed in by patrol vehicles. Deputy Collins sat in the back of one cruiser, wrists cuffed, face pale. The livestock buyer avoided eye contact entirely. The truth had outrun the lie. Ranger trotted back into the pasture on his own, rope still trailing, sides heaving from the sprint. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't seek praise. He went straight to the edge of the sheep enclosure and lay down, facing outward toward the road, guarding. Sheriff Donnelly stepped out slowly, removed his hat, and looked at Mark Walker. "We almost made a mistake," he said quietly. Mark didn't respond immediately. He walked toward Ranger, knelt and untied what remained of the rope. His hands shook slightly, not from anger, from shame. The crowd began dispersing without words. No speeches, no applause, just the uncomfortable weight of knowing how close they had come to killing the one creature who had tried to protect them. Ethan walked over and sat beside Ranger in the grass. He ran his hand along the dog's neck, feeling the steady warmth beneath the fur. "You stayed," Ethan whispered. Ranger's ears twitched, but his eyes remained on the horizon. He hadn't needed the town to understand him. He had only needed to do his job. And in the end, loyalty didn't defend itself with words. It just ran toward danger, even when the rope was already around its neck.